Hey, what's going on? I'm Matt O'Leary back with another video, and today I will be doing a deep dive on Justin Fields. Last week it was Zach Wilson. This week it's Justin Fields. So I'm going to be doing a deep dive. I'm talking with Joey Kaufman, who works for the Columbus Dispatch, and he's covered Justin Fields' time at Ohio State. So I wanted to get some more information from him. And on top of that, I didn't know this until right before the interview, but Joey also covered Sam Darnold at USC. So it was kind of like a double whammy. So it was a really insightful interview. At the end of all this, we're going to do a film review, a few plays that I liked and something that worries me a little bit with Justin Fields. So we'll get into all that. But first, let's get to the interview. All right, I'd like to welcome on Joey Kaufman, who covers Ohio State football for the Columbus Dispatch. Joey, how's it going, man?
It's doing all right. It finally the temperature climbed above freezing in Columbus, so it's a win here. So things are looking up.
Love that for you. Things going well over there. So the reason why I had you on is wanted to get a little more information about Justin Fields, as he is definitely someone the Jets are considering with the number 2 pick. So the biggest thing for me that I've been asked a ton, and I don't really have an answer, and I want to hear what you have to say on it, is what makes Justin Fields different from every other Ohio State quarterback who has come in, and because they see that there's not that success level from Ohio State to the NFL. So what makes Justin Fields different from those guys?
The biggest thing for Justin Fields in comparison to a lot of other Ohio State quarterbacks that came before him was just the fact that he was really hyped out of high school. I mean, Ohio State is historically, as well as they have recruited and pursued talent over the years, typically have not had a ton of high-level Elite 11 type quarterbacks, blue-chip quarterbacks. They've typically been, throughout their history, but such a run-oriented program that they haven't always had sort of a premier quarterback talent. And Justin Fields was that. He was when he came to Ohio State as a transfer from Georgia, he was the highest-rated quarterback, and based on the 247 rankings that they've ever had. So that really, I think, off the bat separates him than a lot of the other quarterbacks who have come through Columbus, and it's probably, I think, a big reason why you haven't seen Ohio State produce a ton of All-Pro or Pro Bowl quarterbacks, is just because they haven't recruited the profile of quarterback who is going to ascend to the NFL and put that type of resume. It's not historically what they've called upon their quarterbacks to do.
Right, absolutely. And when you look at Fields specifically, what traits do you see from him that you think can make him successful at the next level?
He's really creative. I think that's probably the one thing that makes him unique. And he's athletic, he's fast, he's strong, he can take a hit. He throws the ball with a lot of zip. He throws a great sideline ball on some of the out routes where he's going to drop back and get the ball out really quick. And if you were to measure the velocity and like you're sort of measuring a baseball pitcher, the ball seems to kind of pop out of his arm. But to me, what always made him special was his creative ability, was his ability to throw on the run, and he might be scrambling outside the pocket, and he'll throw the ball with different arm angles. That was always the most impressive thing to me about watching him was he could throw on the run, or he could flee outside the pocket, set up, throw, extend plays, keep them alive. So he was always, I think, natural and in that way, and able to maybe do some stuff that you don't typically coach guys. So on some of the uncoachable stuff, I think he's always been special and really proficient in that, really since day one at Ohio State.
That's great. That's good to hear. And as terms of just things that you would say he needs to improve on heading to the next level, what sticks out to you in that aspect?
Really, the main thing, I think, would be his ability he holds on to the ball too long. And it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because that was the criticism that really trailed him throughout his Ohio State career. Sometimes he would hold the ball too long, and maybe there were some dump-off plays. He really thrives on looking for a big play, and then at times has led him to holding on to the ball too long, and maybe that leads to an interception or a sack, and it's why his sack numbers have always been kind of high. But the flip side of that is sometimes he holds on to the ball for a long time and does make a big play. So that's a little bit of a balancing act for a coach, whoever gets him. And lately, so that's one area you probably want to shore up in the NFL, is kind of figuring out that balancing act. When are you holding the ball longer to make a big play, or if you're holding the ball longer, you have an opportunity to dump it off or just throw the ball away. And then late in his junior season, this kind of arrived a little bit, but he threw more interceptions. He didn't throw as many interceptions as a sophomore. His first year at Ohio State, he only threw 3, and 2 were in the final game against Clemson in the semifinal. But this year he threw more, and he threw 3 in one game against Indiana. So at times he kind of forced some of the big plays. But in general, it's kind of hard to find areas of his game where, at least in college, that he really struggled at. He was proficient pretty much in most areas.
That was my next thing for you. Is that slow processor criticism fair? And are you worried about that heading towards the NFL, or do you think that's something he can get better at over time?
I think he can be coached in the NFL, because I think there have been a lot of NFL quarterbacks lately who have been allowed to make off-schedule throws, and you've seen it with Patrick Mahomes and Russell Wilson. So I think in the right situation, he could thrive, because hopefully you would have an arrangement where you'd have a coach and a play caller who are able to find that balancing act. And I think Ryan Day at Ohio State was someone who was able to click with him. And I think you ideally want that to be in the way in the NFL where somebody is able to find that happy medium between his tendency to hold the ball too long but also then capitalize on big plays. So I think sort of being in the right offense is going to be really important for him.
Speaking of this year and his junior season, there's a 3-game stretch that I look at: the Northwestern game, Clemson, and Alabama. All 3 of those games were very different from each other in his performances. Which one of those games is the real Justin Fields? Is the Clemson game just too much of an outlier there, or is the Northwestern game, where, to be fair, not a lot of his teammates were playing in that game? Like which one of those 3 performances do you look at and say, okay, that's more the Justin Fields that I've come to see covering him at Ohio State?
It was definitely more of the game against Clemson, where he put up the big numbers and it was flashy. The Northwestern game was really an anomaly, and Indiana was really an anomaly, because it was games where he was against Northwestern, he was under 50% passing, which was really unheard of in his career. I think one of the things that was so remarkable about Fields is, as much as he had a chance to make big plays and always had a knack for making big throws or a big run, he was always really efficient, always had really high completion percentages throughout his sophomore year and into his junior year, and didn't throw interceptions a lot. Was just always kept the offense on schedule and moving, and wasn't going to have a lot of plays that were blown up through turnovers. And that changed against Indiana. That changed against Northwestern. Both of those teams really put a ton of pressure on him. So I don't view Northwestern, Indiana really as a consistent pattern for him, just because there were very few games like that. So I think he's closer to maybe a ceiling against Clemson, where that is, I think, what you're going to see more of from him.
Now, he seemed to start this year as almost like a quarterback 1B to Trevor Lawrence, and now some people have him as their quarterback 3 and Zach Wilson as quarterback 2. Do you think that falls overreaction, or do you think it's justified?
It is interesting, because he's always sort of been on Trevor Lawrence's tail throughout his whole college or in high school career. I mean, Trevor Lawrence was the number 1 recruit in the 2018 recruiting class. Justin Fields was number 2, and has just trailed him throughout the process. I think it's fair that he's competing for the number 2 spot with Zach Wilson, but I think Justin Fields' body of work going back to high school and his sophomore year is just longer than what we've seen from Zach Wilson.
And as for just his time at Ohio State in general, do you look at him as someone who's a leader in that locker room? Is he like a vocal guy? What's his style?
When he first came to Ohio State, he really wasn't a vocal guy, because that was a team which had, for one, he was a transfer. When he came in 2019, he was a sophomore. He was still fairly young. he was a transfer, so he had not been with the program for very long, and that team had a lot of established guys already. Chase Young, Jeff Okuda, J.K. Dobbins, all guys who were first round, or not J.K. Dobbins, but Chase Young and Jeff Okuda were first round picks in the 2020 draft. And so he didn't step into a situation where he was going to be front and center of a team meeting or a weightlifting session or a pregame huddle, and he was going to be the guy in the middle hyping everybody up or yelling at everybody. So coming into his junior year, he took on a little more of a vocal role. And I think he would naturally say, and the people around him would say too, that he's more of a introvert or more of a kind of a quiet guy, but he knew it was his role in the team to try and speak out and be a little more vocal. And he took that upon himself to do that with guys, and people kind of raved about the off season that he had going into this past season and the way he assumed a leadership role. And I think people should keep in mind too, Justin Fields was a big reason why the Big Ten reinstated football in the first place. Few players were as vocal as Justin Fields was. He launched an online petition a couple of days after the Big Ten canceled its season in August, and was just very front and center of pushing the league to reconsider its decision, which was for his family and for his friends. That was a sort of a different type of Justin Fields than they had seen previously. Somebody who had taken on such a front-facing role in the public arena, much different than sort of the quieter side he had showed earlier in his career.
Now, transitioning slightly here, do you see him? Let's play the game for a second. Let's say the Jets take him with the number 2 pick. Do you see him as someone who would be a fit in that San Francisco style of offense that's expected to come over here with Mike LaFleur?
I admittedly have not watched as much of San Francisco's offense. Can you catch me up to speed a little bit about what they sort of pride them?
Yeah,
in that offense,
zone read, play action, rolling out the quarterback, stuff like that.
I think so, just because what he did at Ohio State required a fair bit of throwing on the run. They had some zone read stuff. They had him. They moved him in the pocket at times, and even if they didn't move him, he was going to move himself. So if that's an offense where if you want your quarterback to be quick of feet, I think Fields does fit in that respect. His athleticism and his ability to roll outside the pocket and kind of throw on different arm slots. I don't think he has to have a perfectly manicured pocket back there.
Okay. As for just Fields in general, do you see him as someone who's like pro ready, can start from day one, or do you think he'd benefit from sitting a year or something like that?
It's a good question. I think most guys seem to benefit from sitting, but I think if you have to play him right away, I think it's certainly possible. I think he will take. I don't know. It's a good question because he did not start a ton of games at Ohio State, and I think that's something to keep in mind, and probably why I would lean more towards he'd probably want to sit and learn for a little bit, because he was in college for 3 years. In his first year at Georgia, he was largely a situational player. He came in only really at Georgia to run the ball and was kind of a wildcat quarterback in a way behind Jake Fromm. The sophomore year at Ohio State, he gets 14 games, but this past year at Ohio State, because of the pandemic, it was such a shortened season. So he really, in some ways, played only a year and a half of college football, not your total game slate. So I think that's potentially maybe a concern with him a little bit, is he played 14 games as a sophomore and 8 games as a junior, so you add that up, it's 20 games. That's not a whole lot of experience as a college starting quarterback to then come and start in the NFL from day one. I think that'd probably give me a little bit of pause now that I think about it.
Now, I didn't know this about you before we hopped on this call, but before we got started, you told me that you covered Sam Darnold in college. So I figured, why not? You're a good person to ask this. You've seen both of these guys' plays. If it was up to you, what would you do? Would you hold on to Sam Darnold if you're the New York Jets? Or if you're in a position where Justin Fields is sitting there at 2, are you taking Justin Fields?
That's tough. I liked Sam Darnold a lot in college for a lot of the same reasons that I liked Justin Fields in college. I covered Sam for both of his 2 seasons when he was starting at USC in 2016 and 2017 when I was at the Orange County Register. And the thing that you really liked about Sam was he was able to go off schedule. And if the play would break down, that he could flee and fall outside the pocket and make throws. I think Fields is a better athlete and sort of was a more naturally gifted in a lot of areas. So I think he's maybe a little bit of an upgrade, but I'm surprised Sam has maybe been as inconsistent in the NFL just because I did like him coming out of college. He has obviously had a very stable situation, and that would be a concern for Justin Fields as well, stepping into New York. But I think still maybe a little early to give up on Sam, but hey, I think Justin Fields is probably a little more talented of a quarterback.
So would you say of the two, Justin Fields the better prospect coming out, or did you have Sam graded higher at the time?
I tend to grade Fields a little higher. It's just because going back to where he was in high school and the people who watched him in the Elite 11 have always raved about him and the way he was. Sam Darnold really didn't come on until much later in high school. So I would probably grade Fields a little bit higher, just he's a better athlete. I think his arm strength is higher than Darnold's. So I would give the edge to Fields there.
Now, I'll ask you this, where do you see Justin Fields going? Do you think he goes number 2 overall, or do you anticipate a different quarterback jumping into the quarterback 2 slot?
It probably depends on how desperate, New York is for a quarterback. If they're definitely taking a quarterback, I think Fields, I would say Fields. You would know this better than I would, but is there any chance they would not take a quarterback at the number 2 spot?
That's a huge debate amongst Jets fans right now. There are a lot of people who are on the take a quarterback train, and a lot of people on either take Penei Sewell or move down and build the roster around Sam. My thing was more so just along the lines of, you kind of answered it a little bit earlier, but just looking at who the potential next quarterback after Lawrence should be in your eyes. Do you think it should be Fields, or is Wilson overcome that a little bit?
I would still ride Fields pretty hard for that
Okay.
number 2 spot and push him there. I think too, Zach Wilson really came on the scene in this 2020 season. I think in a lot of ways, I wonder if we will look back on this last year of football as being totally different than normal. So I don't know how, if you are going to pick somebody totally based off the 2020 season, I would be a little leery of that because it was such an anomaly of a season. Teams had players out due to contact tracing or testing positive for COVID-19, and some position groups are out. Some teams had different practice schedules. So I don't know. I think just because of that, I'm leery of reading too much into a player's track record and level of performance one way or the other in 2020. If it's good, maybe you cool a little bit. If it's bad, maybe not pull your hair out as much and freak out. But that's sort of where I come down on that. I think just because of what we saw from Fields in 2019, a 14-game traditional season. I think people forget how good his 2019 season was. If not for Joe Burrow, that season is an all-time great season. He was remarkable in his first year starting at Ohio State. I forget what the exact touchdown interception ratio was 41-3. He was really, really good over a long slate of games and against some really good teams in Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin, Clemson. So I ultimately, if you want to pick a quarterback, which I get because that's what makes or breaks a team in the NFL these days, I think I would go with Justin Fields over Zach Wilson.
All right, Joey Kaufman of the Columbus Dispatch. Appreciate the time. Thanks for hopping on with us.
I enjoyed talking about all this. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's take a look at this first play. It just shows the playmaking ability and the footwork and mechanics are still very good when things start to break down, which is exciting about Justin Fields. So let's take a look here. He's going to face some pressure, obviously, from right there, the left side. Escapability, being able to break that sack is good. And then he steps up. So there's still pressure, dancing around a little bit, but keeping his footwork in good position to make this throw. He's going to throw to the left side right here of the field, but look where his feet are pointing. Right there, still is able to throw a strike, which not all quarterbacks do that. And we'll see it from this side too. A lot of times the footwork gets sloppy, mechanics go off, but no, he tries to stay in the pocket. Okay, that's not going to work. Here, let me reset my feet and make a good throw. Good play. All right, how about deep ball versus Clemson? He just makes it look so effortless. Look at that throw. He just makes it look so easy. This ball's going a long way. Play action, step up, throw, strike. right into the end zone against this Clemson defense. That's a nice play, man. Now for something that he can sometimes get in a habit of, we talked about on the interview, not going off the first read. He's going to throw it to the receiver at the bottom of your screen, and you could tell he's going there the whole time. Play action. He keeps his eyes right there, and ball's almost picked off. It was dropped, but the ball was almost picked off, which is just, it's not ideal. You'd like to avoid that if you can, and maybe go to a different read, because the corner covered that very well. Thanks again to Joey Kaufman for coming on and talking with me about Justin Fields. And hopefully you enjoyed the video and got a little bit more out of it and really understand what makes Justin Fields such an intriguing prospect. So that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm Matt O'Leary, and I will talk to you next time.